It was an ordinary Monday morning at St. Helena Medical Center. Loud, busy, and wrapped in routine chaos. Phones rang non-stop, stretchers rolled across polished floors, and doctors in white coats called out instructions while nurses rushed past, the hum of urgency filling every hallway. For the staff, it was just another day. But what happened next turned that routine upside down and left everyone speechless. The automatic glass doors at the ER entrance slid open with a soft hiss. At first, no one paid attention. But then, someone, near the reception, gasped, their eyes widening with disbelief. A German shepherd had walked straight through those doors. Tall, lean, and covered in mud. His coat was streaked with something darker that looked like dried blood. No collar, no owner. And yet the way he moved made it clear. This wasn't a lost dog wandering by accident. What truly stopped hearts cold wasn't just the sight of the dog. Strapped to his back with torn pieces of cloth and rope was a young girl, limp and unconscious. Her hair tangled and messy, face pale as paper, and tiny arms hanging lifelessly at her sides. The busy lobby froze. A pen hung motionless in a receptionist's hand. A doctor's words trailed into silence, and the sound of rolling stretchers faded away. For a few long seconds, no one moved. It was as if the hospital itself had stopped breathing. The dog kept walking, each step steady despite the weight he carried and the blood on his fur. His eyes locked onto the nearest nurse behind the desk. Eyes that seemed tired but determined, pleading but calm. He wasn't barking, wasn't panicking. He had brought her here for help. It was Nurse Lena Morris who moved first. Just 28, Lena had seen her share of emergencies, but nothing like this. Her heart pounded, but she pushed it down and stepped forward, keeping her voice low and soothing. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, slowly reaching out. The German shepherd lowered his head slightly, letting out a low, trembling growl. Not a threat, but a warning. His whole body tensed, muscles tight from fear rather than anger. Even in this moment, he was guarding the child tied to his back. Lena paused, her hand hovering in the air. The lobby felt like it held its breath, waiting. Then she knelt, lowering herself to the dog's level, and spoke softly. "I promise, I'm here to help her." The dog's ears flicked, eyes searching her face. Finally, he stepped back just enough. That tiny moment of trust was all Lena needed. Carefully, she lifted the little girl from the dog's back. The child felt frighteningly light in her arms, skin cold and clammy, her breathing shallow and ragged. "We've got a pediatric emergency," Lena shouted, her voice breaking the spell that had held everyone silent. "Prep trauma room 3, now." The ER exploded into motion. Doctors ran, nurses cleared a path, and monitors beeped to life. The girl was rushed into the trauma bay, placed on a gurney while gloved hands worked to check her vitals and thread 4 lines into her tiny veins. The hospital staff moved like a single wave, trained and practiced, yet still shaken by what they'd just witnessed. And the dog, muddy, bleeding, and exhausted, stood in the middle of the chaos. He didn't try to run or bark. He just watched, eyes following the girl as she disappeared behind swinging doors. His chest rose and fell in heavy breaths, but he didn't collapse. Instead, he tried to follow her, only to be gently held back by security. For a moment, the staff hesitated, but then one young nurse stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let him in," she pleaded to the guard beside her. "He's not going anywhere without her." After a heartbeat of doubt, the doors opened. The German shepherd walked through quietly, as if he belonged there. He padded over to the gurney and sat beside it, still as stone, his eyes fixed on the child. Monitors beeped, doctors worked, but no one dared move him away. Even in the urgent rush, they saw what he meant to her, and what she meant to him. In the hallway, people gathered to watch, whispering questions. Who was the girl? Where had she come from? And who was this dog, carrying her to safety like a guardian from a storybook? There were no answers yet. No one even knew her name. For now, the hospital logged her in as Jane Doe. Outside the trauma bay, a detective named Ben Carter arrived. Calm and thoughtful, watching the security footage of the dog emerging from the woods behind the hospital. Mud clung to his fur, his steps slow but unwavering. Carter frowned. "That's not a stray," he muttered. He knew exactly where to go. Inside the trauma room, doctors fought to keep the little girl alive. Her heart rate fluttered, blood pressure fell, but she clung to life, each breath, a small, stubborn act of survival. Through it all, the German shepherd never moved, never took his eyes off her. His loyalty wasn't loud, but it was unbreakable. Hours passed. Outside, rain began to fall softly against the hospital windows, as if the world itself had paused to watch. Inside, monitors continued their steady rhythm, and the hospital staff worked on trying to save a child whose story they didn't yet know. But the real question hung heavy in every corner of the ER. Who was she? What had happened in those woods? And how far had this brave dog come to bring her back to life? As dawn broke and light crept through the hospital blinds, no one knew the answers. All they knew was this: something extraordinary had just walked through those doors. And the real story was only beginning. Outside the trauma room, Detective Ben Carter stood with his arms folded, staring at the grainy hospital security footage. Again and again. Each time, the same moment played back. The German Shepherd, stepping from the tree line. Mud and dried blood on his fur, carrying the unconscious little girl. The way the dog moved didn't look lost or confused. He walked with quiet purpose, almost like he'd rehearsed this path in his mind 100 times before. Carter couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. Something hidden in the silent space between the dog's steady steps and the child's pale, bruised face. Back inside the trauma bay, the medical team worked tirelessly. Dr. Patel, the hospital's lead physician, called out instructions in a calm but urgent tone. Warm for fluids. Watch her pressure. Let's keep her airway clear. Nurses moved around him with practiced speed, hanging bags of fluids and adjusting monitors that beeped and flashed under the harsh lights. The girl's breathing was shallow but steady. Her heart rate dipped and climbed, fragile as a flickering. Candled up beside the gurney, the German Shepherd stayed planted, eyes locked on her face. His chest rose and fell in slow, tired breaths. Every so often, he shifted slightly, as if trying to reassure himself that she was still there, still fighting. Even when a nurse brushed past him with an armful of supplies, the dog barely moved. His loyalty was like a quiet force holding him together. Detective Carter finally stepped inside the trauma bay, his shoes tapping softly on the tile. He knelt beside the dog, careful to keep his voice low. "You really brought her all this way, didn't you?" The dog's ears flicked, but he didn't look away from the girl. Carter let out a slow breath, then stood, turning his attention back to the doctors. They still had no name for the girl, no ID, no family rushing through the hospital doors. In the system, she remained just Jane Doe, a child saved from something terrible, but still wrapped in mystery. The unanswered questions weighed heavy in the air. Where had she come from? What had happened in those woods? And why had the dog risked everything to bring her here? Hours later, in a quieter corner of the pediatric wing, Nurse Lena sat beside the girl's hospital bed. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and warm blankets. The girl's breathing had steadied, though she hadn't yet opened her eyes. Lena watched the German Shepherd curled at the foot of the bed, his fur pressed against the floor, his eyes half closed, but never truly asleep. "Who are you really, boy?" she whispered. "And what did you both go through out there?" Meanwhile, Detective Carter followed the trail the dog had left behind. Surveillance footage showed Max emerging from the woods. But where had he come from before that? Local police organized a search team, joined by Ranger Miles Cooper, an experienced tracker with years of walking the dense forest that bordered the town. When they gathered at the hospital entrance, Max stood up without being asked, limping slightly from exhaustion. His head turned toward the forest, then back at the officers, as if asking, "Are you coming?" They followed him across muddy trails, down slopes tangled with roots and fallen branches. Max led them carefully, sometimes pausing to sniff the ground or glance back at the team. After nearly 2 hours, they stumbled upon a hidden clearing. There, under a sagging top, lay the remains of a makeshift camp, charred wood, crumpled food wrappers, a plastic water jug, and something that made Carter's heart tighten: a child's worn sneaker caked in dirt. There were signs of a struggle, too: broken branches, a few spots where the ground looked recently disturbed. Max stopped at the edge of the clearing, his body tense, ears forward, his gaze fixed on something only he seemed to see. Detective Carter stepped closer, his voice low. "You tried to protect her, didn't you?" The dog lowered his head, his breathing slow, heavy with exhaustion and worry. Back at the hospital, something changed. Near dawn, the little girl's eyelids fluttered open. Her face twitched with confusion before she locked eyes with Max, who immediately raised his head and let out a low, gentle whine. Tears welled up in the corners of her eyes. "Max," she whispered, voice cracking from dryness and fear. "Nurse." Lena rushed to the bedside, her hand gently resting on the girl's shoulder. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe now. Can you tell us your name?" The girl swallowed, her small hand reaching for Max's fur, as if drawing strength from his presence. "Sophie," she whispered. "My name is Sophie." It wasn't much, but it was something. Sophie, a name that turned the unknown into someone real, someone worth fighting for. Later, in a quiet room, Detective Carter sat with Sophie and Dr. Monroe, a gentle pediatric psychologist whose warm presence helped Sophie feel less afraid. Max lay at Sophie's feet, occasionally nudging her hand. With slow words, Sophie told them what she could remember: a man named Alan, a familiar face from her neighborhood, who had tricked her into coming with him. At first, he was quiet, even kind, but then he grew angry, shouting at voices only he could hear. "He said my mom didn't care about me," Sophie whispered, tears slipping down her cheek, "that only he could keep me safe." Max had tried to protect her, barking and growling, but Alan had kicked him hard. Sophie remembered pain, fear, and then nothing, only waking to find Max trying to pull her up, nudging her awake, refusing to leave her behind. As Sophie spoke, Detective Carter felt something heavy settle in his chest. The quiet horror of a child taken by someone she thought she could trust, saved only because a loyal dog refused to let fear or pain stop him. While Sophie rested, Carter worked quickly with local police to track down Alan. They searched old addresses, questioned neighbors, and reviewed camera footage. Each lead built the tension tighter. The idea of Alan still out there, angry, desperate, and unpredictable, weighed on everyone. Back at the hospital, Sophie's mother, Mara, finally arrived. Her hair tangled from sleepless nights, eyes red from crying. She rushed through the halls the moment she heard her daughter was alive. The moment she saw Sophie lying in the hospital bed, pale but breathing, her legs nearly gave out. Sophie looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. "Mom," she whispered. Mara fell to her knees, holding Sophie so tightly, it was as if she feared letting go might mean losing her again. Max stood quietly beside them, watching, his eyes soft. Mara turned to him, her voice shaking. You saved her," she whispered, her hand gently resting on his head. Max pressed into her touch, as if he understood. Yet outside that hospital room, danger still loomed. Alan was still missing, and no one knew how far he'd go to stay hidden, or what he might do if cornered. And somewhere deep in those woods, secrets remained buried, waiting to come to light. The hospital halls, once filled with routine and noise, now carried the heavy question of what would come next. And as Sophie drifted into uneasy sleep, Max stayed by her side, his amber eyes fixed on the door, silently waiting for the moment he might be needed again. Night settled over St. Helena Medical Center, wrapping the halls in a hush broken only by the steady beeping of monitors and the low hum of machines keeping watch. In Sophie's room, Max lay curled at the foot of her bed, his fur brushing the floor, eyes fixed on the door, as if daring anything to come near her again. Outside, Detective Ben Carter paced quietly, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke with officers combing the town's edges and the forest trails. Alan still hadn't been found, and the weight of that unknown pressed heavy on everyone. Then, just before midnight, Carter's phone buzzed. The voice on the other end was tense, but clear. "We found him," the officer said. "Old Kavanaugh County Road 12. Looks like he's alone." Carter's heart pounded. "Hold position," he ordered, grabbing his coat. "I'm on my way." At the cabin, hidden beneath towering pines, the air felt heavy with damp leaves and old secrets. Flashlights swept across broken windows and rotting wood. Inside, Alan sat on the floor, his back against a wall, hands stained with dirt, eyes empty and distant. In his shaking hands, he clutched Sophie's lost hair ribbon, his voice a quiet mumble no one could quite understand. "I just wanted to keep her safe," he kept repeating, staring at the ribbon as if it held the answer to something no one else could see. Carter stepped forward slowly, careful not to startle him. "It's over, Alan," he said, voice steady. "She's safe now. You don't have to run anymore." For a moment, Alan didn't move. Then his shoulders slumped, the tension in his face melting into something almost like relief or exhaustion. Officers moved in quietly, handcuffing him without struggle. Outside, the forest felt different. The weight of fear lifted, replaced by the sharp bite of cold night air. Back at the hospital, Sophie slept on, unaware of the danger that had finally passed. Max, as if sensing the change, let out a slow breath, his body relaxing for the first time in days. In the morning, Sophie awoke to find her mother sitting at her bedside, eyes puffy from crying but finally smiling. Mara brushed the hair gently from Sophie's forehead. "It's over," she whispered. "You're safe now, baby." Detective Carter visited later that afternoon, sitting gently at the edge of Sophie's bed. "You were very brave," he told her, "and so was Max." Sophie looked down at the dog curled at her feet, and then back at Carter, her voice small but sure. "He didn't let me go," she said. Carter nodded, feeling something tighten in his chest. "I know," he said softly. "He brought you home." News of the German Shepherd, who walked into a hospital, with a wounded little girl, spread beyond the hospital walls. Local papers ran the headline first: "German Shepherd walks into hospital with a wounded little girl." No one could believe what followed. Soon, reporters gathered in the lobby, cameras flashing, as staff told the story of Max's quiet heroism. But Max didn't seem to notice the attention. His eyes stayed on Sophie, never wandering far, as if she was the only headline that truly mattered. A few days later, Sophie was strong enough to leave her hospital bed, taking slow, careful steps across the room with Max at her side. Nurses and doctors stopped to watch, smiles on tired faces. One nurse tied a new pink ribbon around Max's neck, whispering, "You really are a hero." He didn't bark or wag his tail, just stood quietly, eyes gentle and proud. Before leaving the hospital, Mara knelt beside Max, her hand resting on his strong neck. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. "You saved my little girl. You brought her back to me." Sophie leaned into Max, wrapping her arms around him, her cheek pressed to his fur. "You never left me," she whispered, words only he could truly understand, as they stepped outside. Sunlight poured over them, warm and gentle, like a promise of better days ahead. Reporters called out questions. Cameras flashed, but Sophie barely noticed. She held Max's fur tight, her mother's hand in her own, walking forward together into the soft light of morning. The hospital doors closed behind them, and in those final steps, the fear of the past felt just a little lighter. Sophie wasn't just the girl who had been taken. She was the girl who had been saved by the silent strength of a loyal German Shepherd who refused to give up. In the days that followed, Sophie's story spread far and wide, reaching people who needed hope, reminding them that sometimes help comes from where we least expect it. And in the heart of it all was Max, the quiet hero who walked into a hospital one morning, carrying not just a wounded little girl, but the unbreakable bond that brought her home.